Hello and welcome back to the Trinity Student Managed Fund podcast with me, Emanuele Roncalli di Montorio-Veronese, where I speak with leaders in the world of business, finance and technology to give our students a better insight into the careers we may wish to pursue. Today's episode is sponsored by Setanta Asset Management, a Dublin-based boutique investment manager specialising in equity and multi-asset strategies with a fundamental value approach since 1998. With a proven track record of strong performance and 13.2 billion euros in active assets under management, Setanta serves a diverse client base, including institutional insurance, pension funds, charities and family offices across Ireland, Germany, Canada and the United States, applying a long-term investment philosophy that clients value. Today, I sit down with Mr. Steve Varsano, who is the founder and CEO of the Jet business, the world's first and only street-level aviation showroom for corporate jet aircraft. An internationally recognized executive and entrepreneur, Mr. Varsano started his career in marketing, buying and selling corporate jets 40 years ago. His London-based firm and showroom have been the subject of extensive profiles by the New York Times, the BBC, Forbes, and the Sunday Times, among others, and he is often sought by media for discussions on trends in business aviation. Mr. Varsano is a former board member of private jet charter company XOJET and the spaceflight firm Virgin Galactic. Mr. Varsano is also the founder of the Atlantis 2000 Group, a consulting firm established in 1993 to seek merger and acquisition opportunities for companies in the real estate, aviation, and restaurant sectors. Over the course of his career, he has served as Chief Operations Officer at Mountleigh International, Senior Vice President at investment firm Triarc and Triangle Companies, and Head of Business Development for the international restaurant conglomerate Yum Brands. Mr. Varsano also has a bachelor's from Embry-Riddle in Aeronautical Studies. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Mr. Steve Varsano. Okay, we're recording. So, Mr. Steve Varsano, thank you so much for coming on the Trinity Student Managed Fund in your incredible office. So happy to do this in person. So thank you.
That's my pleasure to be part of it.
So I'd love to start with you and your story because I think this is really interesting. You started flying lessons at 14, earned your pilot license at 17, and I believe did your first deal at 23.
Yeah.
Could you kind of give our listeners some context as to how your interest in aviation came about?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I was brought up in New Jersey, outside of New York City, and not, we weren't a wealthy family by any stretch of imagination. My mother was basically a single mom working 2 jobs to support 4 kids. So we sort of did whatever we wanted to do. And if we wanted to really buy anything, we had to go out and work and make money to go buy for ourselves. And at the time, I think I was a dishwasher at a restaurant and sweeping floors and things like that. And a friend of mine, I was at his house one day and his older brother was going up for a flying lesson. And he said, hey, it's a 4-seater airplane. You guys want to come up for a ride? And I said, wow, in an airplane? I mean, I could never dream of being in a little airplane. I think I've only been in a commercial airline maybe a couple of times. So we went up on this flight and I just got mesmerized by it. I was like, I couldn't believe I was up in this little airplane and flying over, New Jersey and New York City. And it was just something that just woke me up. I mean, you really don't know the kind of things that you might be in love with until you actually see them or touch them or feel them. So I came down from that flight and I said, I want to learn how to fly. And I basically was working 3 or 4 weeks to earn enough money to take a 1-hour flying lesson. So I started learning how to fly when I was 14. Legally, you're not allowed to solo until you're 16, and then you get your pilot's license when you're 17. So I did exactly that. I sold when I was 16, and I got my license when I was 17. And then I went to university, and I got a degree, my bachelor's degree in Aeronautical Studies.
The Harvard of Aviation.
Yeah, it's Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, which I'm now on the board of trustees. And it's great to, when you're younger, you don't understand what these people talk about, saying that, I feel good about giving back. But actually to share your experiences and sort of help, the younger people, like, maybe possibly this podcast is going to do, it sort of feels good that you can do things to help younger people, give them a jump start or a head start or any words of wisdom that might help them, not make some mistakes that we had to make when we were younger. And so I came out of university and I got a job as a lobbyist on Capitol Hill, representing the airplane manufacturers. So at that time, I think I was 21, and and it was a great job, but the pay wasn't all that great. His ego was very fulfilled because I'm walking through the halls of the Senate and Congress and in the capital of Washington D.C. But the money wasn't great, so I worked at nighttime. My roommate owned a nightclub, and I used to be working there at night. And the guy used to come in, and in the old days when they had ties all the time, and he had a jet on his tie pin. So I just asked him, "Why are you wearing a jet?" He said, "I sell planes." What do you mean you sell planes? And yeah, I sell planes. And I said, "That's so cool." And over the next few months, he used to come in and bring his commission checks, because in those days you actually got a physical check. And he would show me the checks he was getting paid from selling planes. And after a few months, I just like, where the hell do you work? I mean, I want to get a job there. And, at first he wouldn't get me into his boss, but I finally pushed myself in to get an interview. And I convinced them to hire me for free to learn how to sell planes. And I got a job as a waiter at night to pay my bills. And it took me 9 months to sell my first airplane. I was 23 years old.
And you obviously had such a successful career before building all of this. I'm wondering, what was it that caused you to take that leap and go in and do this when you
So I during the course of selling airplanes, I met a person who did corporate takeovers, mergers and acquisitions. It was a merchant bank, which today they call private equity. In those days, they used to call it merchant banking. And this guy, I sold him 3 planes. We got to be friends. And one day he just said to me, listen, I like you, your work ethic. I want you to come work for me. I became his right-hand man, and I worked in that corporate takeover business for about 15, 16 years with him, which was an incredible education. And we moved to London. We took over a company here. It was a property company in 1991 that had a net asset value of over £2 billion. And this is 35 years ago. $2 billion is a lot of money then. It's a lot of money now, but a lot of money then. And then I finally left him, and I did some other stuff with my ex-father-in-law. We were in the fast food restaurant business, which was not my cup of tea, but it was a new learning. And I wanted to get back in the airplane industry. I wanted to sell jets again. But during the course of that 25-year period that I was out, the whole demographic of where the activity of corporate aviation changed. So it began with 80% of the jets were in America, in the United States, and 19% were really in Europe. And 1% was everywhere else. But over the course of the 25 years from the early 1990s, when the wall, went down and perestroika in Russia, sort of opened up, and the world just changed. And all these frontier emerging markets started coming out of nowhere, like China and Russia and India and Nigeria and all these places that, before you didn't even have bread on the supermarket shelves. And now you have all these countries developing the countries developing companies that actually were, selling oil and agriculture and technology, and these people had to get around the world. So the real demand was really in these countries for corporate jets. And it was hard to go see these people. And when it was in America, it was easy. I like to see my clients face to face, because everybody's into this texting today and SMS and WhatsApp, but there's nothing like you and me sitting here talking to each other face to face, and you can't replace that, even with a Zoom. Mm-hmm. And when all these customers being around the world, it just wasn't financially or logistically, possible. You can't spend a fortune to go fly halfway around the world to meet a guy for 1 hour. So I had to come up with this idea. How can I get them to come and see me? And that's how we came up with this idea of a showroom to basically get people to come and do it. I was going to originally build it in New York, but at the end of the day, I decided to do it here in London.
And not to jump ahead, but I'd love to know that, because you're obviously from America. I'd love to know, because I think from my view and a lot of people in Trinity on campus, there's so much optimism around the US, and a lot of people, like, they want to go work for an American company, an American bank, a big firm. Why did London, and what was it?
Yeah, well, I could give you a really great story and sort of reverse engineer the whole thing and tell you why Europe, was underserved for our industry. But the real truth is probably one thing that all your listeners here are going to learn, that the biggest reason we do most of our major decisions in our life is because of a woman. And I met a woman here in London, and I was going to build a showroom in New York. And I kept coming back and forth to London to see her. And eventually I convinced myself in my head it made more sense to do it in London than in New York. And that's how I ended up here 15 years ago. And it built the industry. And actually, in fact, it was, because the outside of the U.S., which obviously the U.S. calls international, not what everybody else calls international, but that world outside the U.S. is very ignored by the majority of the American aircraft brokers. And those are 90% of the brokers in the world. 65% of all the jets are in the United States. So, the low-hanging fruit, if you want to call it, is in the U.S. And I justified it in my head, that I wanted to be here because all of these people in Europe and Africa and the Middle East, Asia, they just got ignored. And I thought it was be a good idea to put this in London, where a lot of these people flew through and meet these people. So it ended up being the right decision, but for a reason that is not because of the business.
I suppose, yeah, geographically, because a lot of people are flying through London if they're going to...
Yeah, I mean, basically, any company that has a jet, there's probably a 95% chance that they're going to fly through New York, London, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Dubai. So those are the major cities that any international company is going to fly through. So the original idea of this concept was to build these showrooms in those locations. And now I'm working on another location in the U.S., in New York, to do another location.
So it's coming about.
It's coming about. It took me a little longer than I wanted to, but I think it's time to expand now.
And I'm wondering as well, because in preparation for this, I heard you have a really strong research team, and I'd love to know, and you've mentioned it now, like why aren't private jets? You gave a statistic. Why aren't private jets much more common, say, in a massive country like China, or in maybe more like emerging market countries? Not that it's an emerging market, but
listen, it's a great question. China, just as an example, is about the same landmass as the United States. Okay. But in the United States, there are 5,000 airports for a corporate jet to land in. And in China, there's 145. Oh, so the amount of airports you can actually go to in China is tiny, limited. And the other thing is 70% of the airspace in China is actually controlled by the military. So the corporate jets can't really fly around freely around the country. So in something that is a remarkable statistic is that the United States, even though it's the same size, of course, China has about 4 times the population, and the United States has 14,000 corporate jets in the United States, and in all of China, mainland China and Hong Kong and Macau, there's about 400 jets. So it's a tiny business, and because of the airspace being limited, and also because people in the country that don't want to stick their head above the surface of showing wealth, because then the government sometimes, looks at you with a microscope, and they don't want to be, they don't want to be public.
Right. And then I'd love to now talk about, what's so unique about you is you're sharing such a unique aspect, which only maybe the 0.1% get to see and experience. Could you maybe debunk some, myths you think about the jet business and so forth?
Sure. Well, the biggest myth is the perception of what corporate aviation is. The perception is that a bunch of rich guys are flying around with golf clubs and skis and drinking champagne all the time. The fact of the matter is 70% of all the occupants in a corporate jet are middle management, and about 20% are the C-suite people. And there's less than 10% is personal private use, and a lot of that's in the charter market. So people don't ever buy a corporate jet for personal use, and companies obviously don't either. And what happens is, of course, at the end of the week, people who are executives in these companies that are flying around, they're really working 24/7 in every waking hour, and their spouse, whether male or female, is actively in that partnership with them in their business model. Now, it might be a CEO of a company and their spouse is not an employee of the company, but when they're traveling all the time, the spouse is with them, and they're a pair that are always talking to other people in other industries. It is rare that they're actually in in a completely personal vacation kind of atmosphere. Not atmosphere. They might be in a vacation environment, but not necessarily in an atmosphere, meaning that they're always working. They're always seeing other people, peers in their industry or business people, because they tend to hang around with each other because they're always talking business. And it's not that they're really they're not taking advantage of using a company jet to go someplace on the weekend. They end up someplace on a Friday, they end up going somewhere else, and then they go back to the office on Monday or Tuesday. So that's a big misconception.
I'd love to come back to a point you mentioned on SAF, some of the developments in the aviation industry, but just coming to it now, what drives you now? I mean, you could easily retire. You could have retired 20 years ago, 10 years ago. Why are you waking up at 6 a.m., 3 hours before everyone in the office? What is it that still drives you? I'm really curious.
I think, listen, it's, I was never given anything in my life. I have to work for everything I've ever had. And I'm on adrenaline, I think. I think, what I love about my industry is dealing with the who's who of almost every sector in the world and almost every country in the world. And the people I'm so lucky to meet and do business with, I learn something from every one of them. It gives me sort of drive. Sometimes they just beat me through the wall. They kill me with aggravation and stress. But at the end of the day, I keep learning from them. And I think it keeps me sharp. And of course, I just want to stay active. When COVID first happened and we got really locked down and, nobody could leave their houses and stuff for the first couple of weeks, I thought I was going to kill myself. I mean, I said to myself, how can anybody in the world ever want to retire? I mean, to have nothing to do in the day was suicidal to me. And I want to get out. And after those first 2 weeks, I came to the office every single day. I was the only one here. But, those 6 months, everybody was home. But I came in every day. I still made phone calls. I still wanted to talk to people. It's human nature. People should be talking and meeting other people. And I think now with the social media that's been so successful with us in the last year and a half, to answer your question, I'm actually getting much more fulfillment, satisfaction, having this conversation with you, where I know I can actually help some of the younger people, because they come up to me and they say, thank you, I'm learning so much, I'm being inspired. And I never even knew I had that bone in my body, but I'm really happy that I can share some of my experiences and communicate them to some people who could benefit from it. And that's driving me probably more than the opportunity to sell more airplanes.
I think the inspiration point especially, because I know a lot of people look at your videos and it's actually a motivating factor. It's not they shouldn't have this, you know what I mean?
I mean, and you'll see it's rare. It's rare that I'll actually talk about something negatively. And the one thing, sometimes they have these people which are really idiots on the social media that know nothing. They know nothing about what they're talking about. It's going to cost you $1 gazillion to buy this plane, to operate it, and sometimes I just have to get on there and set them straight, because it's a ridiculous insult to our industry. I hate doing those because I don't like to be negative. I actually get the most positive responses from people saying thank you for attacking these people, because they're saying stuff they know nothing of.
So I'd love to know, what is the future of the jet business, and what's maybe one development in the industry which you're really excited about?
I think the next thing is to obviously open up another location in New York, I think it's going to be. And so I'm trying to work on that now. And as far as the future of corporate aviation, I think this whole world of what they call eVTOLs. So a helicopter is a VTOL, a VTOL, which is vertical take-off landing. So a helicopter is called a VTOL. Now you have an eVTOL, electric vertical takeoff and landing, which is really a passenger carrying drone, or more commonly talked about today as a flying car. And this whole sector, people think of it as a dream. It's an imagination. They are real, and they're being certified. Literally, the first one's going to be certified probably by the end of this year or next year.
Oh, wow.
And there are hundreds of companies that are trying to develop these. Some are people in their garage, but there's some that are, Airbus or Toyota or these kind of companies. So there's a lot of big money chasing that. And you're going to see a lot of this stuff taking the place of helicopters and smaller jets, they're going to start coming out in a hybrid and an electric kind of format. Eventually, it'll become hydrogen, but those are going to be completely carbon footprint free. There's going to be no engine noise, sort of a drone noise, and you'll start seeing those in a lot of places. First, doing cargo delivery, air ambulance kind of stuff, and eventually they'll become passenger carrying, and eventually they'll become autonomous.
So aviation as opposed to kind of automotive vehicles, that's the...
Yeah, well, actually, automating an airplane or a helicopter is actually safer than in a car. In a car, if you think of it, you have autonomous cars. It's just a two-dimensional kind of a plane. So if one has a half a second mistake, you can run into each other or run over somebody or hit. But if you look at 100 birds flying at one time in formation, you notice they never bump into each other. They're basically have this sort of radar system that keeps them away from each other. And two airplanes today, they have a system in there called TCAS, which is a collision avoidance system. So if two airplanes are coming toward each other, the machines talk to each other, and one would go down and one would go up, or one would go right or one would go left. So they sort of like a magnet would repel each other.
Right.
And that, is in a four-dimensional kind of thing from a bigger distance. So just think of the safety factor. These airplanes will never bump into each other because they have much further distance to notify each other and avoid each other, not like in a car.
Wow, that's really interesting. You don't think about that, but then it makes sense, right, as well, because there's so many more cars as opposed to planes as well.
For sure. So and the other thing is people always say, wow, is the airplane safe? Well, hate to say it, but the majority of accidents happen because of pilot error, not because of plane error.
Right. What's the safest plane in your view?
No, it's not really that.
Metrics,
it's really that you can't really do that because it's not the plane that ever has the problem. It's the pilot who did something wrong, or maybe there was an oxygen issue, or they didn't hit the right system, or they weren't thinking, or they were on their cell phone. Who knows what it was?
Right.
But it's sometimes it's an intentional or an accidental issue that the pilot did, not because the plane was at fault.
It's pretty interesting. I want to come now to your lessons and wisdom on like deal making and negotiation. I suppose we start with you've mentioned you're dealing with the most powerful, most successful people in the world for years. What are there common characteristics? Am I naive in saying this? Are there common traits, characteristics? I mean,
listen, the thing that you really need to know when you're negotiating with these people is know as much about them as you possibly can. Okay, and try to truly understand what is their solution that they're trying to solve for. What is the problem they're trying to solve for? Because if you just think about what you're trying to do and you're trying to accomplish, okay, and you don't take any regard for what they're thinking, you're never going to reach a satisfactory, mutual agreeable spot. So really figure out what they're trying to accomplish and then say, okay, what do we need to do to get to that point? Now, you might ask for 100 things, you only need 5. I mean, look at the way Trump is negotiating now. Okay, he says, I'm going to do tariffs and I'm going to tariff the heck out of this country. But really, that's not what he wants. He wants something over in this other pocket that is much smaller. But if he asks for something here crazy, they'll give him this little thing. So, sometimes what you ask for is not really what you want.
Right.
And you're trying to figure out how you get from point A to point Z. It's never a straight line. And you want to understand that what zigzag or a curve or whatever, what you have to do to get to that point. And you always, if you can, you want to educate your client so much that they come up with the idea that you want them to, that you want to say, that you want them to come up to. So you're trying to basically give them all this information, and then they say, hey, wait a minute, I got a light bulb. I think we should do this. You're like, wow, that's a great idea. But, you're not trying to sort of trick them, but you're really educating them in so much of the foundation of what you're talking about that they understand that this is actually the logical answer to what I want to do. And if you sort of go at it with that attitude, with a sincere kind of a educational approach, not I want to win, you're going to lose, then you have a much better chance. And these people, if they think you're in it just to win, believe me, you're not going to win. These people are very experienced, they're powerful, they're rich, they're smart, and they know how to get what they want. So you have to really do it in a way that makes them not feel like you're winning and they're losing. Maybe you're both winning, or maybe they can feel like they win and you're losing, but you're not really, because what you wanted to gain is what you won, and not the bigger picture you were going after.
It's the art of the deal.
It is the art of the deal. It's like Trump's book, The Art of the Deal. Get the other side to say what you want them to say, but not by trick, by really educating them to understand it and see that it's really the right answer.
Could we go a bit deeper on this? Because you also mentioned in a podcast, I think it was, you said you have to take ego out of it in negotiating. And so could you talk a bit more? Could we get some more wisdom of the Steve Varsano's art of the deal?
Yeah, ego and greed, okay, are really two of the worst human traits in the world. And ego, even in your personal relationships, that's why you have problems and fights with your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your parents. It's always ego. If you take ego out of things, you'll never have any issues. And if you take ego out of, especially negotiations, even today, I have to admit, I try to take ego out of everything, but sometimes somebody says something to me so mean, and they cut a deal off, and it just makes no sense, and you get so furious that you respond with really angry gusto. And if you ever do this and you write an email to somebody when you have that happen to you, I am asking you, please, please, please save the email. Do not push send. Write it, save it. I call it the 24-hour rule, but you can go back 6 hours later or whatever, and you go read after you've calmed down and your testosterone has calmed down and all this kind of stuff, and you go read your email. You will be shocked what you were going to send. It's unbelievable how your brain works when you're in an angry mood. Really, really push save. And this is the problem when people are in an ego and they're negotiating. You can't push save and wait, because you're in that discussion, and the stuff that comes out of your mouth is really bad. And if you go back and sort of listen to a recording of that discussion between people, you say, I can't believe I said that. And you don't realize it, but you're caught up in the moment, and you say terrible things that you can't take back. And it damages you for the rest of your life, not just in a deal. It could be in a relationship, personal or business. So the ego really needs to be checked. Don't worry about winning or losing that conversation. What they say, winning the war, losing the fight, or winning the fight, losing the war. It's really, what are you really trying to accomplish? If you get into walking down the street and somebody's screaming at you and you start cursing at the guy, you're going to get into a fight. You're going to get into a fight. Who knows what can happen to you? Turn around and walk away, man. I mean, somebody's going to think less of you because you didn't get punched in the face and get a knife in you? You really need to check your ego. It's a dangerous trait.
Could I ask, what's the biggest mistake, or rather, what's the biggest lesson you've learned from a deal? Biggest lesson?
The biggest lesson is a deal is not usually dead when you think it's dead. And don't ever give up. I'm not saying don't ever, because eventually you have to see a deal is over and it's never going to happen. But I can tell you that it's much more than half the times that we think a transaction is over, or the person says, forget, I'm not doing that, I don't want to deal with this anymore, and then you just give up. You got to go back again. And it's not just in negotiations of a deal. It's if you're trying to start a business, or you're trying to build a relationship with a business or person, don't ever give up so easily. Because really, when you go back the second, the third time, in a different approach, people appreciate you actually making that second or third or fourth approach. And then they say, you know what? Okay, I'll listen to them. And then, as I said, it's personal and in business. And it's really so many times the guys here think, oh my God, we lost that deal. And it's, no, you haven't yet lost that deal. Let's come up with another idea and let's have another reason to call them and find a way to get in there and talk to them. It's something, don't ever, ever give up. And when I say ever, ever, it doesn't mean ever, ever, because eventually, some things just are going to fail or it's not going to happen. But I'm saying 75% of the time, you'd be shocked how many times you can bring something back to life.
From a no to a yes.
Yes.
And then I'm just looking at the time. If we can move on to sort of advice for students. Look, you've got a fantastic team here. I'm sure you've hired so many people over, your career. Like, someone's looking for a job for you. How do you hire talent? What do you look for?
To tell you the truth, most people, I don't know what the right word is, but enhance the CV description. And really, when they start talking about, the companies they work for, and they start talking about this company, it's a multi-billion-dollar company with 15 offices and 2,000 people. Who cares? What did you do? Okay, I want to know what you did. What was your accomplishment? What was your contribution? Do you like working on your own? Do you like working with a group of people? What do you do in your free time? Are you ambitious or you just sit home and watch TV? If you were to fast forward your life 10 years from now, and I said to you, okay, you are 10 years old now, give me your CV. What would you want your current job or business, what would you want it to say right there on your CV 10 years from now? Now, okay, you see what you really want to do. Now you have a target. Because, it's crazy. People don't really have a target. They have a dream, a concept, but they don't have a specific laser-focused target. So write down, where do you want to be in 10 years from now? What's that CV say? Now figure out, okay, what do I have to do to get to that point? Go back. What's the step before that? Is there another step before that? Is it a certain company? Is it an industry, a sector? Do I have to learn something before doing that? Do I have to meet somebody to get to that company? And really, you have to develop that path, because people just don't do that. They just go out and get out of university and okay, let me get a job. What's available? Mm-hmm. You should be much more focused about that. And if you want to go work for some bank, you think it's got the best image, you want to work for a specific bank and an investment bank or in equities or whatever. If you can't get that position in that bank, go get a lesser position. And I don't care how less. And again, this is ego. Okay, people might think it's demeaning, but take any job in that bank that you can get in and just get in the door. And then you start figuring out who in that bank are the people you really want to talk to. And being in there, you go and see them. They're going to see you now. You're working I don't care if you're in the mailroom, okay? You go see this guy. I just took this job because I want to someday be this investment banker at this bank. How do I get there in the company? What can I do? And these people respect you so much for what you've done to get in there, and you're so passionate about going to work for them. That is something, again, take ego out of it. And really where you want to be 10, 15, 20 years and just reverse engineer it.
And what would be your advice for a 20-year-old now in university or leaving university? Or even, if you could turn back the clock to yourself, what would you say?
Listen, I probably would have gone into finance if I really looked back at my whole life. It's just that I had this epiphany when I got into that little airplane. And unfortunately, people at 20 years old haven't been exposed to enough industries to know which one they would fall in love with. I mean, I don't care if you're meeting a boy or a girl, okay? You don't know really you're going to be attracted until you actually meet them. You could say, well, I think I want this size, this weight, this color, this race, this ethnic, but really until you actually encounter them, you don't know. And it's a problem with 20-year-olds. You haven't been exposed to enough industries to know what you would love and don't love. So, I think people don't like social media because they say it's a waste of time. But matter of fact, why internet and social media can expose you to so many different opportunities in in technology, in pharmaceutical, in agriculture, in any kind of industry. And the more you're searching and the more you're reading, the more something might click. And you really to go, if you think you have a click in a certain sector, go to these different kind of conventions. Take the time, whether it's local or even if you have to travel to consumer electronics in Las Vegas, or if you're in aviation, you go to the aviation convention in Geneva in May, or if you're into politics, go to one of these a labor or conservative kind of a convention. Figure out what sector you're like, and then try to find out where they have these conventions or these get-togethers, and go meet people, talk to people, and you'll start educating yourself much more, and you'll see if something has to click in your brain that, wow, I love this. And you really only build your career in something you love, that you're passionate about. Don't do it because your parents told you should be a doctor. Really be passionate. If you're passionate about something, you'll be successful at it.
And so take a broad approach, take initiative to see the different areas, and then go in.
Yeah, but open your horizon. It's hard because schools aren't exposing students to enough different industries. You read, AI is taking over the world. Of course, that's a great industry to get into. It's got a huge future. But what's going to feed AI is, what company is going to feed, where's the web that's going to support it. I'm not even that educated enough to talk about that kind of stuff. I'm too old to understand this AI world, crypto, NFTs, or that came and went in 5 minutes. You have to see what tickles your fancy, and that's really what people need to do. Expand as much as their horizons, meet as many people, go to these conferences, and see which one clicks in your brain.
I have so many more questions I'd love to ask, and there's so many different avenues we could even go down. But I suppose as a kind of wrap-up question, what's the greatest advice you've ever been given by a mentor or throughout your career?
It's funny.
It's very on the spot.
I haven't really had. I have had a specific mentor. I think one of the biggest things I've learned is take your loss as quick as you can and move on. So, whether it's an investment or whether it's a fight with somebody, you don't try to drag it on. Again, it goes back to ego. You try to drag something on because you're trying to fix something or win something, and you're carrying this negative energy with you. They should just cut it off, and the next day. I guess the best analogy that none of your people will understand, but if you're married and you get a divorce, you are hating the other person, and the lawyers are getting you fight to each other. You got to pay money, you got to all this kind of. But the fact of the matter is, the day it's finished, the next day, my God, this weight is all off you. You feel great. The negative energy is gone. You move on with your life, and it's like a new day. The sun's come out. And the same thing with a fight with a friend or a business kind of thing. Really just cut that loss and just let that ego forget it and move on the next day. It's something that you really, it really is one of the best advices I've ever had.
Cut your loss. I think that's especially pertinent for investments in the sector as well. Look, Steve, thank you so much for the time. We've even gone over, and thank you so much again for offering to do this in person. So I really appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure. I hope this was what you wanted to hear, and I hope it benefits any of the people who are listening.
Absolutely.
Good luck to yourself and all the people that are at Trinity.
You have been listening to the Trinity SMF podcast. You can find more of this podcast on our website, www.trinitysmf.com, and follow us on our social media to find out more about the podcast releases, upcoming events, and much more. Thank you again for listening, and stay tuned.